tragedy upon tragedy. But today there's plenty of tragedy. So I will let you know that make sure I got just about everybody in here, almost everybody. Okay. I will let you know that the subject matter of today's sermon does involve violence, involves rape, it involves, just tragedy upon tragedy. And it's in the scriptures for a reason, not so that we glorify that violence or make jest of it, but that we recognize that this is the terrible tragedy that unfolds upon the world when every man does that which is right in his own eyes. And so we're going to be faithful to preach the word this morning. So I'm actually, despite the subject matter of the text, I'm looking forward to preaching because it is there for our edification. And you say, boy, this text, it brings me down. It makes me feel yucky, uncomfortable. That's exactly the point. That's exactly the point. That is what the author of the Judges Scroll meant for us to feel. And so I hope that as we jump into this text together and we start to unpack this ugly story, that you'll understand why, and that we'll be able to effectively look inside ourselves when we look at this story. Let's see. Just again, before we get started, I know Cheryl's still down there. I think she's getting the elements ready. Just want to encourage you. We got all kinds of. I've ordered some more collateral, visitor brochures. We have all kinds of things to hand out. I think our church is really the facilities are really shaping up to be a place we can be proud of. And this spring, as we enter into our beautification step, I'm going to be personally investing heavily in making sure that this church is beautiful on the outside, just like I believe it is on the inside. Still praying about the Lord magically getting rid of our popcorn ceiling. I don't know how it's going to happen, but that's not our biggest issue. Right now, I want folks, when they pull up, they'll see a place and they'll say, wow, this is cared for and beautiful, and I want to step in, and I know that we're going to be able to accomplish that. But as we do, what we are going to continue to need as a church family, people who are faithful and committed and excited and energized, and inviting people to come out and saying, hey, you need to experience Thompson Baptist Church. I think right now in our culture in America, we have seen a stop in the hemorrhaging of churchgoers, and that trend is now reversing. And we should take advantage of that trend and say, hey, listen, there's a lot of people looking for religion right now and looking for answers. There's a lot of bad places to land. And I'm confident that TBC is not a bad place to land. I don't say that because of me. I say that because of all of us here together as a church. You could have great preaching and ugly people. You could have ugly preachers and great people. And then you can just have people who look ugly like me, But I think our church is a good balance of pastors. I'm speaking of myself as well as Kev, who try to be faithful, and a church family that is wonderful beyond description. Each and every one of you is incredible. And it's a privilege to come to church. It's a privilege to come to church. And we need to start looking at it that way. Not that we don't, but we need to really, really lead with that. I suppose I have one opening illustration. This isn't just pregame show, which is going to be a little bit of a different feeling this morning because I know we're still dealing with sickness. I still feel like I have my head in a barrel. I just want to say this one last thing. There's a business group every Thursday morning I go to called B&I. It's to get business. We really, Brackley Electric does not need to be a part of B&I. We don't need that. We don't need the business that it would afford us. But I go for the relationships, and it costs money every single quarter, and then every single year, thousands of dollars to be a part of a group that meets on Thursdays for about an hour and a half. But it's valuable to me, and it's a privilege for me to belong to that group of people because they're like-minded people, business people. You know what I'm saying? Here, we get to come to church, and you get to walk in, and we all pay our dues, right? But it's free. There's no persecution. There's nobody standing out there with guns. There's no Gestapo or Gazpacho. No, either one. We live in an amazing country that, despite its warts and foibles, of which there are many, we have the freedom to come. You say, Britt, what's got you all riled up about this? Guys, I've missed church between the snow and then everybody being sick, and then last Wednesday we had to cancel because everybody and their mother was sick. And it's like, oh my goodness, just let us go to church. We're here. The day's finally here. I feel like it's the day I get to wake up and go to an amusement park. Like I'm so happy to be in church. And I hope that you are too. Um, and so let's push back against the culture that not that you do. You guys know I'm the only one who does. At least is honest about it. That checks the watch and taps the clock, right? Let's push back on that. I know we got things to do, but man, the day's here. We're here in church. I'm really excited to be here, and I hope that you are too. Let's sing a chorus. It will be worth it all when we see Jesus. Life trials will seem so small when we see Christ. One glimpse of His dear face, all sorrow will erase. So bravely run the race till we see Christ. Oh, man, that was one of those coughs that hurts every bone in the body. You ever had one of those? You cough and then your muscles are like, I hate you. Adam, would you come up? I'm going to lead a couple of choruses. Sound good? We call him the maestro in a hoodie. I didn't know if I could do it. I can't do it. All right, somebody give Adam a chorus. We're going to do a couple of choruses. Yes. Thank you, Lord, for saving my soul. Thank you, Lord, for making me whole. Thank you, Lord, for giving to me thy great salvation, so rich and free. I got one. How many of you know I will enter his gates with thanksgiving in my heart? Yeah, well, let me show it to you guys. I will enter his gates with thanksgiving in my heart. I will enter his courts with praise. I will say this is the day that the Lord has made. I will rejoice for he has made me glad. Let's clap. He has made me glad. He has made me glad. I will rejoice for he has made me glad. He has made me glad. He has made me glad. I will rejoice for he has made me glad. How many of you that's your first time hearing that song? All right, let's try it all together. Now you know it. Here we go. I will enter his gates with thanksgiving in my heart. I will enter his courts with praise. I will say this is the day that the Lord has made. I will rejoice for he has made me glad. He has made me glad. He has made me glad. I will rejoice for he has made me glad. He has made me glad. He has made me glad. I will rejoice for he has made me glad. One more time. I will enter his gates with thanksgiving in my heart. I will enter his courts with praise. I will say this is the day that the Lord has made. I will rejoice for he has made me glad. All together. He has made me glad. He has made me glad. I will rejoice for he has made me glad. He has made me glad. He has made me glad. I will rejoice for he has made me glad. All right. So, anybody have a chorus? Yep. I have found a friend in Jesus. He's everything to me. the fairest of 10,000 to my soul. The lily of the valley, in him alone I see. Always his lips and make me fully whole. In sorrow he's my comfort, in trouble he's my stay. He knows me every care on him to roll. Hallelujah! He's a lily of the valley, the bright and morning star. He's the fairest of 10,000 to my soul. Had a crazy idea. As you seated, I had a crazy idea. We're gonna do something where none of this 20-second, 30-second stuff. All right, no monologues. Mind up. No, just in a few seconds, we're gonna do rapid fire stuff so we can squeeze in a lot in just a couple of minutes. Someone's name, what you're thankful for about it. We're just gonna thank the Lord. And the reason I thought of it is because it's relevant. No, no. It, because of Bellinger. I looked at him and I thought, man, I was sick all last week at work and half of the week before it. And the Lord led him directly elected to be able to carry on a bunch of stuff, and I wasn't there. And just seeing him and knowing that he gives me a warm blanket of security, and I'm thankful. So now all blankets are called Bellingers. So yeah, there's a basket full of Bellingers in the back. Again, there's a very nice Bellinger we have. Very good. The rename is official. Kevin? Stop it. No. No. Now you have. Brother Ray, I shoot you. Praise the Lord. Well, come on, rapid fire. Don't do what I did. Kevin. You know what? That was almost that. All coffee is not drinking a warm cup of coffee. Amen. Well, that's a weird story. Who else? Billy. Praise the Lord. Amen, amen, amen. Ah, that's wonderful. You know, we just installed a bunch of lights on the front of the church. That wooden cross is up there. Romeo made that for us. And I said, if you got to move it, move it. Don't get rid of it. It's going somewhere else. And they put them on the side.
market. Get a couple fellas up here. Awesome. Please be faithful to give, support the work. Come on, those X. All right, Charles, no one else.
Well, we only have a few announcements this morning. The women's breakfast is Saturday, March 22nd at 9 a.m. for women's breakfast and study afterwards. And then the men's breakfast is Saturday, March 29th at 9 a.m. with the men meeting. And then Saginaw County Republicans are meeting here Tuesday, March 25th at 7 p.m. And then the potluck for Saturday, March 30th after service, and the potluck after church. We are honoring everyone who has March and April birthdays. The sign up sheet is up on the bulletin board. Press early so that everybody can.
I forgot my Bible. That's not a good sign. It's right actually right there, but all right, yeah, that was great. Oh, yeah. Still nice and hot. There we go. Oh yeah. Oh my goodness, you guys, I was sick for so long. I did this thing where I had this norovirus Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and I was just feeling better on Saturday. I was even gonna watch a fight with Ray. Turns out Ray actually meant he wanted to fight me, and then I was like, oh no, and so I was really looking forward to that. It was like, oh, finally feeling better. Then that Saturday morning, I had to text Ray, and I was like, man, I don't think I can do it. I'm getting sick. And sure enough, that Sunday, Monday, Tuesday just got worse and worse. I had this flu, and I didn't have a fever. And without the fever, your viral load doesn't shed, right? Your fever kills, it slows and kills the virus. So it's born. And with fever, apparently, if you have a whole bunch of flus in your life, your body might stop reacting to them as though they're really really bad invaders. Anyway, so it just knocked me right out for 6 days. And usually I have the flu for 3 or 4 days max. This was gnarly. So we're taking our vitamins. We're doing all the things. Thankfully, I do seem to be recovering. So thank you so much for your patience, for your prayers. I don't thank people for good vibes. The Bible doesn't say the effectual fervent thoughts of a righteous man avail much. The Bible says that when we pray, we ask God to heal. And I'm all about praying the will of God. But at the same time, I'm asking God for things specifically, and I'm not going to be super pious and be like, God, I really don't care if I get better. No, I want to get better, so I'm going to pray, And so, um, thank you for praying for me, and please pray for my family. I was praying for them last night. My precious children, they all have fevers, and some of them gotten pretty high, and so we're keeping a very close eye on it, keeping them hydrated. Take them to the doctor, with a 104. They're just going to charge you a couple, send you home with some ibuprofen that they charge you a couple thousand extra dollars for. So we're just keeping a really close eye on it. So please be in prayer for my family. My wife's not feeling great either. Um, it's going to be very difficult to go back to work tomorrow with a sick family, but I'm anticipating most of the fevers will break today and overnight tonight. So thank you for praying for me, and it is really, really good to be back. Amen. We're in our No More Heroes series, and today is very likely the second to last sermon that we've got. And the title of the sermon is A Grim Conclusion, and this is part 20. And I don't know that I'll break it off into part 21. I think we're just going to do Act 2 next week and Act 3 next week. But throughout the Judges scroll, we've been introduced to would-be hero after would-be hero, and we've had the morbid displeasure of watching them all crash and burn, each and every one. Entirely by design, as the theme of the scroll is what humans do when they're ruled by their hearts instead of a king. It's the theme of the scroll. I'm not a huge fan of the Reformed doctrine of total depravity, or certainly much less radical depravity. I do believe we're sinners in need of a Savior, but I also don't believe that every single person walking down the street is going to kill me if I look at them wrong, right? In other words, humans are created with the capacity for flourishing. Put it this way: there are unbelievers who build their businesses using business practice proverbs in the Bible. You can still accomplish things living according to biblical principles, even if you aren't a Christian. Does that make sense so far? So similarly, I think that there are people who are certainly able to live within the confines of God's good world and God's good way simply by abiding by what we today would call basic common sense of morality because of what Jesus did. He impacts our culture. Okay? So I'm not a huge believer in the whole, total radical depravity thing. I'm not. I do believe that we are stained deeply. We are flawed. We are in many ways broken. We are deposed royalty, and we are absolutely unable to save ourselves. So don't get me wrong. Just because I don't believe that babies are born vipers in diapers doesn't mean that we need a Savior. We need a Savior. Because every one of us has sinned, and there is none righteous. No, not one. We don't have an innate goodness that we'll be able to bring before God and say, hey, I'm naturally good. No, I think we're actually very naturally depraved. And I think that our natural bent is what causes us, if we submit to it, to act like a bunch of gorillas and monkeys and fling poo when we don't like each other. You know what I'm saying? So what humans do when they're ruled by their hearts instead of ruled by a king is exactly what we see in ourselves and in the lives of others. When things happen that we don't like, Kevin and I were just joking about the microphone changing, and he might end up having to use one of the Andy Stanleys that I wear instead of his fundamentalists like he wears. Those different styles, right? And he says, I don't want to, I will, but I don't want to. He's throwing a fit, having fun. As humans, we do that for real so many times, and we lash out, and we hurt other people when we're forced into situations that we don't have any control over, right? You say, what are you going with all this? Well, you remember what Jeremiah said in Jeremiah 17, verse 9. He said, the heart is deceitful and desperately wicked above all things. Who can know it? In other words, you could put the human heart under a microscope and you wouldn't even begin to scratch at the surface of just how devious and carnal we can be. So, on one hand, I don't believe that every action of every human is irredeemably wicked. I don't believe that. I also believe with all my heart that humans, just as much as we have a capacity for excellence and virtue and nobility and proper living, we have just as much an unlimited capacity for darkness and evil and wickedness. That's the amazing thing about being humans, is because of our broad expanse of possibilities, that's why we see so much utter depravity on one end and so much innate goodness, not innate, but expressed goodness on the other. Does that make sense so far? I know I'm kind of going off the rails here a little bit, but all that to say is every human that's born is born with the faculties of choosing this day whom they will serve. Every human. And in Judges, we're introduced to people, and every single time we're introduced to a new character, we're supposed to say, okay, which way will this person choose? How will this person go? What road will they walk? What lifestyle will they embrace? And time after time after time, we watch them choose their hearts. The worst advice you can give someone is to follow their heart. I believe it. I believe it. I know that might not sound very fair, and it certainly doesn't sound very culturally acceptable. That's the worst advice you can give someone. Follow your heart. Now, by that, I don't mean that there's not times when you can trust your gut, especially mamas. They got a good gut feeling. Or dads always have an infallible gut feeling about any boy who wants to look at their daughter. They need to die. Not by my hand, but they do. What's up? My tie. Very discreet way of saying, we all know you haven't worn this shirt before, Britt. Let me help you with that tag. Amen. My wife got it for me for my birthday. So, while I won't completely detract from the idea that humans sometimes have good gut feelings and sometimes can, look inward and say, okay, what do I... When people say follow your heart, what they're actually asking you to do is subscribe to your own moral compass, which is radically fallible. You say, I don't believe it. Exhibit A, look around. Look around at the world in which we live. Look around at our whether you want moral, political, economic, whatever infrastructure you see. Just here in the United States of America, how is it going for us now that we've been essentially following our heart for, say, since the 90s? Yeah, if we had a nice bar graph, you'd see those bars just get lower. You know what I'm saying? I don't think I have to really make this case, but just for the point of it, when humans follow their hearts, when they do what works for them, when they say, this seems right to me, and don't consult a timeless guide, or at least peers, this is what happens. It's not unique to America or American politics. In fact, throughout the Judges scroll, we've been introduced to, I wrote here at the bottom, deliberately, this Judges scroll finishes with a 3-act saga that emphasizes what I've been talking about clearly and tragically. Clearly and tragically. Act 1 of 3 is the vulnerable are exploited. In this chapter, Judges chapter 19, we're going to see the vulnerable exploited over and over again. And we're going to get through this chapter together. And it came to pass in those days, well, right there we can pause. Because what did this say? This is back when there was no king in Israel. Now, that's actually how chapter 18 opens up, isn't it? Sure. In fact, that phrase has been uttered many times in this scripture, or in this scroll. Back in these days, remember, this is when there was no king in Israel. We're being set up right from the very beginning. As we enter the end of this scroll, we're getting to the end. People who are reading this scroll, you're understanding that we're watching collapse after collapse after collapse. And then, as if to make us really stop and think, as if to almost explain what you're about to hear, the author once again says, just a reminder, this is when there was no king in Israel, and everybody did that everybody followed their heart. Everybody obeyed their own internal moral compass rather than obeying the commands of a king. By the way, can I just ask you really quick, why is it, I'm wasting your time here. No, I'm not. Why is it that, especially in America, when you hear about the idea of a king telling people what to do, we go, oh, not here. Not me. And then a bald eagle flies in overhead. That was more him being wounded, but you get the idea. And then he's like, he has an American flag in his beak, and he's got two Beretta 1911s that he's like firing over the crowd. Why do we hate the idea of a king? Well, because in our national history, we don't have super great experiences with kings, taxation without representation, things like that, repression. But just because we've experienced some bad kings in our lifetimes doesn't mean there's no such thing as a good king. There is only one true good king. And so when I talk about this is the story of people who follow their hearts rather than obey a king, that's not two bad options. That's one terrible option and one amazing option. In fact, the entire Judges scroll is set to introduce the monarchy in Israel because that was eventually going to be the answer, not King Saul, but King Jesus. We need a king on a throne telling us what to do. You say, I don't need anybody telling me what to do. Yes, you do. Yes, you do, and so do I. Why is it that when we turn, 18, 25, 35, 45, 55, all of a sudden that makes us able to be like our own pilots? What difference does age and experience make? We're still children. And when you compare that to how old God is, we're definitely still children. Who do we think we are? Psalm 2. Why do the heathen rage and the people imagine a vain thing? They grab at their cords and they rip them off and they say, I won't be controlled by any king. What, so you can go destroy your life? Good kings don't want to oppress you. They want to free you. They want to make it so that you can flourish. Imagine goldfish always trying to hop out of their bowl. I won't be kept in this bowl. You're going to kill yourself. See? Yeah. Yep. That's following your own moral compass is like a goldfish wanting to hop out of the bowl. So, anyways, we're being set up as we enter this chapter. We meet a Levite who's supposed to be an intermediary for Yahweh. That's what Levites were supposed to do. They were supposed to be the good guys. If everyone else was going to fail, it wasn't going to be the Levites. It was a Levite, by the way, who made the whole golden cow that Kevin was talking about this morning. So right from the beginning, anyway. So he's headed to his father-in-law's house to retrieve his very young concubine, very likely between 12 and 14 years old. You say, that's gross. Yeah, this is when there was no king in Israel, and everybody did that was right in their own eyes. And she fled to her dad's house. Now, a concubine is a young woman who does not have the legal status of a wife, but rather has the legal status of a slave. A concubine is very much a sex slave. And I don't want you to have a romanticized idea about concubine. If it helps, I want you to think about Princess Leia and Jabba the Hutt. I'm not caring too much for her outfit in that movie, but the idea was that she's in chains, bound to some slimy monster, and she can't get away. You understand what I'm saying? That's a concubine. And it's a terrible situation. Look at verse 1 with me. Let me try to read through this text. There's 30 verses. It came to pass in those days there was no king in Israel. There was a certain Levite sojourning on the side of Mount Ephraim who took to him a concubine out of Bethlehem, Judah. And his concubine played the whore against him. We're going to talk about that in a second. She went away from him unto her father's house and was there for 4 months. And her husband got up and went after her to speak friendly to her. The Hebrew word there is leb, which is heart. He went to go speak to her heart. A little translation. And to bring her again, having his servant and a couple of donkeys, and brought him into his father's house. And the father of the damsel saw him, and he rejoiced to meet him. So the father-in-law, the damsel's father, retained him, and he abode with him 3 days. So they did eat and drink and lodge there. And it came to pass on the 4th day, when they arose early in the morning, that he rose up to depart. Right? So the Levite said, all right, me and my concubine really do have to go. All right? So he's trying to say goodbye to his father-in-law. You following the story so far? The damsel's father said unto his son-in-law, hey, comfort your heart with bread, and then afterwards go your way. So they sat down and ate and drank. And the damsel's father said unto the man, hey, listen, be contented to stay here tonight, and let your heart be merry. There's the heart again. And the man rose up to to go, in verse 7, and the father-in-law said, no, you've got to stay. So he stayed again. And then he arose early in the morning on the 5th day to depart, and the damsel's father said, hey, listen, stay. Hey, are you picking up something? This woman's father does not want him to leave. We're going to learn why in a second. So they stayed till the afternoon, and then they rose up, and then they ate. But the man rose up to go, and his concubine and his servant, his father-in-law, the damsel's father, he man, his concubine and his servant. And his father-in-law, the damsel's father, said unto him, Hey, listen, the day's drawing toward evening, so stay tonight as the day gets to an end, and then tomorrow you're going to get up early and get a good start. Verse 10, the man's not going to stay the night. He rose up, he got out of there, came unto, we would say Jebus, Jebus. That's actually Jerusalem. And there were his 2 donkeys with him, his concubine was with him, verse 11. And once they pulled up to Jebus, the day was far spent, and the servant said, Hey, let's stay here. Verse 12, and the master said, We're not going to turn aside to this city of a stranger. It's not the Israelites. We're going to go to Gibeah. So in other words, we're not going to stay in this hotel because that's in a foreign land. We're going to go stay with my countrymen where it's safer and better. All right? So verse 13, he said, Hey, let's draw near to one of these places to lodge all night in Gibeah or Ramah. So they passed on and went their way, and the sun went down on them when they were by Gibeah, which belongeth to Benjamin. Now, when the sun goes down, you have to stop. This isn't like you can just turn on your headlights and keep driving. You're going to get killed if you're traveling at night. I hope that makes sense. It's just a dude, his servant, and his concubine. So verse 15, they went and they stayed in Gibeah. And when he went in, he sat him down to the street of the city. There's no man that took him into his house for lodging. So he's in the town square, him and his concubine and his servant, at night in Gibeah. Should be safe. They're Israelites. They're staying with Israelites. It's cool. It'd be like it if I went down to the park in Brunswick. You know, not ideal, but it's not like I'm going to get killed. We're all Mainers here, Maine transplants, all right, you know. Verse 16, Behold, there came an old man from his work out of the field at even, and he was also of Mount Ephraim, and he sojourned in Gibeah, but the men of the place were Benjamites. So when he lifted up his eyes, he saw a wayfaring man in the street of the city, and he said, Hey, where are you going? Where'd you come from? Cotton Eye Joe, right? In verse 18, the Levite said, Hey, we're passing from Bethlehem, Judah, toward the sound of Mount Ephraim, and I'm from there. And I went to Bethlehem, Judah. I'm now going to the house of the Lord, and there's nobody that's receiving me into their house. By the way, Israel was known for their hospitality. And so when someone's not receiving you into their house, that means something's not right. Something's going on in this town. This is a weird town. You get it? He said, There's straw and there's provender for our asses, our donkey, and there's bread and wine for me and my handmaid, and there's no want of anything. And the old man said, Hey, peace be with thee. Howsoever, let all thy wants lie upon me. Don't lay here in the street. It's not safe here. He said, I'm gonna take you in. You know, we're from the same stomping grounds, Mount Ephraim. I'm gonna take you in. You guys following this story so far? If you're not, I can definitely clear it up. I know it's we're making our way through. So he brought him into his house and gave a provender, yes, and took care of the donkeys, right? He washed their feet, ate and drank. So verses 1 through 21, the bulk of this chapter, tell a very simple story. Concubine plays the whore, whatever that means, right? And say, I know what that means. Well, hang on. And runs away to her father's house. The Levite leaves, goes to her father's house to get her back. Her father says, Please, you got to stay. You got to stay. He's trying to get this girl to stay at his house, and this guy too, right? Doesn't want to let him go. They finally go, too late in the day. They didn't stop with the Jebusites because they wanted to be safe with his countrymen, and they ended up stopping in Gibeah. All right? That's where we are. And this old man says, I'll take you in. Now, verse 22. As they're making their hearts merry, there's the heart again. As they're making their hearts merry, behold, the men of the city, certain sons of Belial, that's a fancy way of saying worthless scoundrels, they beset the house round about and beat at the door and spake to the master of the house, the old man, saying, Bring forth the man that came into thine house that we may know him. Now, am I in Genesis reading about Sodom and Gomorrah, or am I in Judges 19? Well, this is done on purpose. The author of the Judges scroll is absolutely crafting this to be an ironic twist on what happened in Sodom and Gomorrah. He's using the same wordplay. He wants you to see that the Israelites are now behaving just as wickedly as the Sodom and Gomorrahites were. And Jesus himself said, when he was woeing unto Chorazin and Bethsaida, it would be more tolerable for Sodom and Gomorrah than it is for you. You see how this works, right? So we're now seeing that the Israelites are doing exactly what Sodom and Gomorrah did. They're banging on this guy's house, and they're saying, Hey, we know you have somebody in there. And these are men, and they're demanding that this man be brought out so they can commit a homosexual rape of this man. All right? So, verse 23. And the man, the old man, the master of the house, he went out to them and he said, Whoa, guys, I pray you do not so wickedly seeing that this man is coming to my house, don't do this folly. Behold, here is my daughter, a maiden, and his concubine. Them I will bring out now, and humble ye them, and do with them what seemeth good unto you. Do with them what seemeth good unto you. But unto this man do not so vile a thing. Delivering 2 teenage girls to be gang raped is good compared to the vile thing that they were going to do to this guest. I want you to just camp out for a second there and just put a pin in that thought. Do you understand what's happening, though, in the text? This is just like Sodom and Gomorrah all over again. Verse 25, the man, they wouldn't listen, so he took his concubine. So the man, the Levite, took his own concubine and brought her forth unto them, and they knew her and abused her all the night until the morning, and when the day began to spring, they let her go. Then came the woman in the dawning of the day and fell down at the door of the man's house where her Lord was till it was light. And her Lord rose up in the morning and opened the doors of his house and went to go out his way. Verse 27 is in the singular, I want to get this right, singular third person masculine. I believe that's the case in Hebrew. In other words, it's written from the perspective of a man who thought he was going to leave alone. He thought she was gone. When he stepped out of the front door, he was not expecting to see his concubine there. He had, as one commentator said, disposed of her. She was gone. Used her in exchange for his own life. So he rose up, opened the doors of his house, went to go his way, and behold, the woman, his concubine, was fallen down at the door of the house, and her hands were upon the threshold. She was clawing and scraping to get in. From what we understand, her hands are at the threshold of the house. She wanted to come into safety. And in verse 28, he said unto her, "Get up, let's go. Get up, let's go." She didn't answer. So the man took her up on the donkey and got home, and when he was coming to his house, he took a knife and laid hold on his concubine, who was clearly dead. And he divided her together with her bones into 12 pieces and sent her into all the coast of Israel. And so it was so that all that saw it said, there was no such deed done nor seen from the day that the children of Israel came up out of the land of Egypt unto this day. Consider it, take advice, and speak your minds. You say, "Pastor, that's a gross, awful story." It is. It is. Let me run through a couple of thoughts with you. The young concubine is said to Zonau, play the whore against her husband. This might be a very misunderstood and oversimplified concept, especially to our modern Western ears. There is a staggering amount of study on this topic that seems to indicate she'd run away from her husband due to the fact that he was more than likely prostituting her. You see this all the time in the Old Testament. Judah slept with what? A temple prostitute. A woman who was prostituted in the name of Yahweh. We see this also in the life of Eli and his sons and the temple prostitute. You understand what I'm saying? This was common. This wasn't rare. So this is a distinct possibility. In fact, there's a lady, her name's Kimberly Dixon. Here's what she said. She said the ancient Greek translation, that would be the Septuagint, omits any reference to prostitution, saying she left angry or repulsed by the Levite. Pamela Tamarkin raised bridges this difference by arguing that the Hebrew text is most naturally translated to say that the Levite was prostituting her. This understanding is consistent with the biblical documentation of ancient leadership and priestly involvement with temple prostitution. The Greek translation repulsion would be sympathetic to the young girl as the status of a slave, with the status of a slave rather than a wife, taken to be prostituted. She runs away in anger or disgust to her father's house. So when one say, well, she plays the whore, that Hebrew word zanah may very well color in the idea that she was being used as a harlot and ran away from her husband to seek safety in her father's house. You say, no, I don't believe that's the case. I don't believe this guy would ever do that. I'm sorry, you're talking about the same guy who literally, when he saw her crumpled in a heap at the front door, instead of saying, "Are you okay?" said, "Let's go." Almost as if he'd seen her be used by men before and left at the front door when they're done with her. Are you following me? This is terrible. And that seems to be the case. I'm not hanging my hat on that, but if you force me at gunpoint, which I don't know why you would ever do that to me, but if you force me at gunpoint, I would probably say that I would quite easily believe that this Levite was prostituting his concubine. Um, Women were seen as property back then. They weren't supposed to be seen as property by God's people, and that's what makes this whole thing go backwards, you see. So when the Levite arrived at her father's home, her father manipulated the general rule of hospitality to protect his little girl and keep her home with him. Don't you see now? It wasn't like why do you think that the author of the Judges scroll would be so careful to include the fact that this guy said, "Please stay another day. Please stay another day. Come on, stay one more day." He doesn't want her going home with this guy. You see what's happening here? He says, "Please don't go. Please don't go. Come on, stay. Come on, make your heart merry." Over and over, he insisted that the Levite stay just one more night. Ultimately, he fails. Despite doing everything he can to get the Levite to stay and not take his daughter away, the father relents and watches his daughter leave with the Levite into the evening. And then we read, on the way home, the Levite's servant suggests they stay in Jerusalem, but the Levite declined, saying, "I'd rather dwell in the safety of my fellow Israelites," which is a huge mistake. And as a result, they ended up staying the night in Gibeah. Now, it just occurred to me now that I should have, could have, would have, but I didn't research if the Jebusites would have actually been a safe place to stay, which would actually indicate some racial tendencies on the part of this Levite, just like Jonah had. Remember? Jonah said, "I'm not going to those people. They don't deserve God." Why? Well, because of their bloodlines. They're different than me. And so the Levite doesn't want to stay in Jerusalem, which, by the way, it's not a coincidence that in our English Bibles, Ruth comes right after that, because then you see actually good things happening in Jerusalem as opposed to bad things. It's just, anyways. So all of that to say, he ends up staying the night in Gibeah, specifically at the home of an old man who also hailed from the hill country of Ephraim. And again, you're getting the sense that when you walk into this town, something's not right. They show up at nighttime. They're not safe in town square. Nobody's receiving them into the house. Something is wrong here. They stumbled upon, you ever seen one of those movies or read one of those books when you walk into kind of a ghost town and everything's eerie and weird? Like, that's what this town is supposed to feel like when you're reading. So as the evening waned, the house was besieged by the men of Gibeah in an ironic retelling of the Sodom and Gomorrah account. The old man rejects their proposal using the Hebrew word nebalah, which means vile or outrageous, and instead offered both his daughter and the concubine of his guest as something that's somehow less vile and outrageous. In the end, the Levite ended up thrusting his concubine outside so that he could be safe. And again, this is, if this hadn't happened, I might second guess the idea that he already used her as a prostitute, or prostituted her out. This shows how he treated this young girl. Treated her like garbage. And remember, what's Act 1 all about? The exploitation of the most vulnerable people. And we're going to chat about that here right toward the end. All night long, the men of Gibeah raped and abused the young girl. She finally crawled her way back to the house where her husband was staying, and she died on the doorstep with her hands on the mantle. The Levite opened the door in the morning, said, "Come on, let's get going." When he realized she was dead, he took her to his house, cut her into 12 pieces, and mailed them to the 12 tribes of Israel, insisting that Israel do something about the men of Gibeah. So now he wants justice. Now this guy says this was outrageous that they would kill her. Dude, you gave them to her. You gave her to them. But you're gonna send all these, you're gonna say, "I can't believe this happened." And then toward the end, just consider it and take advice and speak your mind. This is his words to the people on the coast of Israel, saying, you guys need to do something about this. So this Levite is so arrested by this injustice that's happened to him that he's completely overlooking his part in the evil And all he wants is to be avenged because his property was destroyed. And he says, I expected this to happen in Jabus, but it shouldn't have happened in Gibeah. So I just have some observations about the text that I want to make with you. But we're not going to go into Act 2. Act 2 and 3 are tragedy upon tragedy. But there are some things to think about. First observation is as follows. Notice that the concubine has no voice in this account. She never says a word. Not a word. No voice. Absolutely by design. Absolutely. You never hear her say a word. That's because in real life, her voice was drowned out. She was exploited. She was abused. She was the most vulnerable. Now, time out. The Israelite law of hospitality is actually the key player in this entire chapter. He went to the father-in-law. No, she went to her father, who took her in and was hospitable to her. The Levite went to his father-in-law's house, and he was hospitable to the Levite, even though he manipulated those laws of hospitality. Then, when they were traveling, they did not seek hospitality in the Jebusite camp because the Jebusites didn't have a law of hospitality like Israel did. Make sense so far? So we said, we're going to Gibeah, where the law of hospitality was not practiced. And so they stayed in the town square until an old man came and practiced the law of hospitality. And then these guys came barging down on the door, just like Lot in the Sodom and Gomorrans. And in the ultimate act of hospitality, the owner of the house said, hey, I've got a virgin and he's got a concubine. Take these. Because that was just property. The real people to which you become hospitable are the men. See how that's being played out here? Hospitality. Hospitality. In all of the hospitality shown in this text, no hospitality is shown to the concubine. Not really. She went and stayed with her father, and her father, instead of saying, you show up on this doorstep, I'll kill you, instead played within the rules of hospitality. They followed the letter of the law of the Israelite hospitality rule, but completely failed to be truly hospitable to the ones who needed it most. Do you understand what the text is doing? It's painting a picture of this paper mache hospitality. Oh, y'all come over for some biscuits and gravy? Yeah, I know, Southern hospitality, right? Chicken fried steak. I heard somewhere recently that meat should never be used as an adjective. You don't chicken fry something. It's country fried. Anyway, I think chicken fried steak is delicious. But you walk in and they say, oh yeah, come on in, hospitality, we'll treat you right. Come on over for some supper. And you may be playing the game of hospitality, feeding people, hearts are merry, everything. But actually the most vulnerable people are not being shown hospitality. In fact, what this text is showing us is that in following the letter of the law in hospitality, the ones who needed hospitality were being left out. Interesting. This is the commentary, guys. This is the commentary on Israel playing it by the book, keeping all the laws, and yet missing the forest for the trees. You see? Just like they would do in Jesus' day. They tithed off their mint and their anise and their cumin, and they played but they missed the spirit of the law. They missed it. It just goes to show that you could keep the Torah perfectly to a T in practice. Some folks may have, but they still fell far short of mirroring the heart of God because they turned those into empty mechanisms to the extent when they delivered this precious girl. Anyways, the author is trying to help the reader see that during this time in Israel, when everybody's doing what's right in their eyes, when everybody's doing what works for them, the truly innocent don't have a voice. And the same is true today. Sin and selfishness drown out the voices of the most vulnerable without exception. You may not think that you're in a very privileged station in your life. And compared to people in Hollywood, none of us are. But your station may be quite privileged compared to some others. And you may be being a good Christian, but maybe overlooking the most vulnerable in your life that you have an opportunity and a responsibility to help. That's just a thought. Also notice that the two men, the host and the Levite, pay attention to this one. They were so opposed to the homosexual violence that threatened the Levite that they considered something heinous, like gang raping a young teenager, as a good alternative. You pay attention to that? I know you did. Homosexuality, homosexual acts against the Torah. They're against the law, right? Clearly. But a man having sex with a woman, well, that's at least natural. You see his rationale. Don't miss it. Same exact thing with the hospitality. They're choosing a lesser of two evils, not from a moral or personal perspective, but from a letter of the law perspective. It may seem very weird and alien to you that they would sacrifice these precious girls. As long as these men aren't violated by men. Ew, yuck, gross, or the Hebrew word for it, vile, outrageous. Listen, I'm with the Bible. One man, one woman, one lifetime. That's how God designed us to be. Absolutely. But look at what they did. Instead of putting the most vulnerable person in the most protected spot, they expose the most vulnerable person because, homosexuality? I'd rather have a gang rape of a young teenager than to be violated homosexually. Do you understand what's happening? Homosexuality is an abomination. But a young girl having sex with a bunch of guys against her will, well, at least that's, not homosexuality. You picking up what? Clearly that's what happened. Of course that's what's happened. Of course. We must never be guilty of diminishing one sin simply to overcome another. We must never acquiesce to sin on any level, however more abhorrent or novel or perverse the alternative may be. This is what happens here in the United States of America. One thing will happen, it'll get us all up and it'll get our hackles up. It'll get us all on the fence, and we say, I can't believe this is happening in my country. And then they roll out something worse, and now nobody has a problem with the other thing. You know what I mean? It used to be that we really cared, and we say, you can't put women on the front lines in the military. Because there was still like this chivalry where the men actually fought to protect the women instead of hiding behind women. Come on, Saint. Somebody I'm not in crazy town here. I'm talking about frontline stuff, please. And then there was the now we don't care about any of that. The idea of chivalry, protecting women, the idea of it. Now we've been introduced to so many other barbaric and perverse things that we'll take this if it means stopping that. Are you picking up what I'm putting down? It just reminds me a lot of the LGBTQ stuff. We'll pick one letter that's grosser than the others. And we'll say, you can have these other letters, but this one we're not going to bend on. Yeah, but then what happens when all of a sudden our society is approving of things like bestiality, pedophilia? Come on, guys. Then we go, whoa, okay, all right. Oh, the bestiality and pedophilia, the transgender thing, that's not hurting anybody. But this, well, now hold on. The big bad guy in the room right now will soon be the not so bad guy in the room because we found something else. And we leave and we acquiesce and we give ground and we say, well, this is okay as long as you don't do this vile thing. No, that's not okay either. We do not shift our definition of what is right and what is wrong based on how many new wronger things come out. Or on what they say on television. My soul. You know how Satan gets us to acquiesce to more sins? He gets us to laugh at them. He gets us to laugh at them. I'm not going to go on that. I'm just going to leave it there. Just think about it. Second to last slide is as follows. Notice that the Levite was so enraged by the loss of his concubine, despite the fact that she died by his own cowardly and disgusting hand. It's far too easy to get angry and bent out of shape at the offenses of others while ignoring our own, especially if our own offenses are markedly worse than others. As Christians, it's an easy trap to fall into and an even harder trap to get out of. Listen, please listen. I'm going to submit something to you this morning, and I want you to really think about it. Yes, it is wrong. I'll put it this way. Leftists are going to left. Leftists going to left. All right? It is wrong when we're seeing all kinds of stuff in our nation go that is exploiting the vulnerable. Come on. Look, I don't get political, so I'm not even going to talk about it like a political issue. I'm just going to talk about it like a moral issue. Like mutilating children's genitals, brainwashing children in public schools, hiding from their parents. You know what I'm saying? I'm using that as it's a hot topic thing. Yes, that is wrong. But as Christians, I want to submit to you that our response to that can compound that evil if we're not responding like Jesus. In other words, we can walk around and we can say, I can't believe they're getting away with it. I'm going to cut this up into 12 pieces and send it out because we need to do something about this terrible evil. We need to do something about all of this crime, and we need to do something about all of this government conspiracy and this, that, and the other. And we need to, and that's all fine and good. But to get so wound up and amped up about evils that are happening in our society without acknowledging that we could be contributing to some of them with our lack of Christ-likeness, we're just as guilty as the Levite. Actually, it was just last night, this morning, I was replaying in my head when the Saginaw County Republicans used the church building to host Matt Brackley as he told his tale. And there were a few people who stood up toward the end of his speech. If you were here, you remember it. And they said, this is BS, this is blankety blank, you get the idea, right? And they swore and they yelled and they stormed out. And a bunch of Republicans said, yeah, that's right, you get out of here. Yeah, you get out of here. I expect people to shout. But does it make it better when a bunch of Republicans go, yeah, that's what I thought, not so tough now, get out of here? That's just as bad. Are you understanding what I'm saying? That's carnal. It's the big macho stuff, like watching WWE or something when you're 6. Do you understand? We're adults. And as Christians, we are Christians. I'll confess something to you. I wasn't hostile toward anybody for sure that night. There was one person who wanted to come in and kind of trying to sneak in. They weren't for anything that the Republicans were doing, and she was asked to stay out, and she was finally allowed in. Matthew said, I want everybody here. So I came up to her and I said, I apologize to you. I said, I'm a Republican. I said, but first I'm a Christian. I said, I didn't treat you with servant-hearted kindness or whatever I said. Now, that just gave her more ammo in her knapsack just to throw at us because I was just another mean old Christian. But I still had the responsibility to apologize to that person because long before I'm ever any sort of politician of any color, I'm a Christian. And every single person that walks through this door should know that if they need their feet washed or a cup of cold water, they get it here. We stand up against wrong. But we never contribute to and compound the evils of our society by not acting like Jesus. Does that make sense? That's what the Levite did. I can't believe they did this. And he didn't even realize he was part of the problem. Lastly, this. There's something that's a little bit lost in English in this text. It's all about the heart. In verse 3, the Levite's going to try to get his concubine back by speaking to her heart. He then makes his heart merry with his host. And then the Israelite leaders later take up this topic in their hearts. It's all about the heart. The passage shines a light on what happens when the heart rules instead of Christ. So I leave you with this. May it never be that our hearts are our rulers, but rather that Christ rules them. All of this in Judges 19. From the nasty lifestyle of the Levite, to him going to get his concubine back after 4 months, to him not staying in the Jebusite camp, but staying in Gibeah, to the old man surrendering his virgin daughter and his host concubine as property, to the people banging on the door, stay with me, to the people banging on the door, begging for these men, for this man to have sex with him, to the man shoving his concubine out the door, leaving her to the mercy of these animals. Every single decision in the text started in their hearts. So why would we consult that same dark counselor and hope that it would lead us anywhere but astray? I close with this illustration. If you've seen the movies, great. If you've read the books, you're smarter than me, you're boring. Lord of the Rings. My wife has seen that. She's seen and read multiple times. I've seen them. If I'm reading books, they're always academic papers and stuff. I should make more time for. But Wormtongue, the aptly named Wormtongue, right? Yeah. Grimka Wormtongue. Let's pretend that's it. My wife is probably listening, going, "It's what is it? Grima." That's it. Grima. That's it. Grima Worm. And I've seen the movies, and you have a man, and he's pale. He's the king sitting on the throne. I'm on the throne. All right, big guy, you're on the throne. But it's really not you. You're just a hollowed out husk of a man. And you got Grima Wormtongue whispering in your ear, telling you what to do. That's your heart. You may be on the throne, but your heart's really calling the shots. And your heart is evil above all things and desperately wicked. And we just read a chapter of people who all relied on their heart for what to do. Impulsive decisions, carnal decisions, sitting there. Hey, how long did these men of the city wait before they finally, their lust overtook them and they said, let's go? They had to know it was wrong. They're Israelites. They didn't care. Their heart told them so. So this week, it's a difficult sermon to try to make an application on. I certainly don't deny that. But this week, I'm not suggesting that any of you are going to go out and do any of these vile things. But just know that you have the same capacity for evil. Despite your disposition, despite your different personality, you have the same capacity for evil as any of these other guys do. Guard your heart. The book of Proverbs says, guard your heart, for out of it spring all of the issuances of life. Out of it are the issues of life. Issues is a fountain, a spring. You say issues, you think of like an issue of Newsweek. No, not that issue. Or I have issues. No, issue is an issuance, a fountain. And everything here springs out and becomes reality. So you have to protect the fountain. Don't let it be poisoned. So, that really is where we're ending. Promise. How are you guarding your heart? For these guys in the story, it started somewhere. Their culture turned them into things they should never have been. What is your culture trying to turn you into? Television, internet, music. How can you guard your heart this week? I want you to really think about that. In fact, let's come to the bread and the cup together with that question in mind. Jesus said, just like the Passover, the beautiful symbols of how Israel was protected by God as they wandered through the wilderness, Jesus took and repurposed those symbols into symbols of his own flesh and blood. After all, like Paul said, it was he who led the Israelites through the wilderness. He was that rock, you see. As we approach these symbols of his body and his blood, may we partake with a renewed commitment and awareness guarding our hearts. Would you do that this morning? Would you say, Lord, my heart is yours. I want to guard my heart. I want to not listen to my own moral compass. I want to listen to you. Let Jesus sit on the throne of your life. Let him rule your heart. Protect your heart. It's the most precious thing you have. It's the only thing you have. So let's take a few moments.